whatever?
We're on air. Yeah, let's take 20 minutes. How about that?
All right,
We can
sounds good.
cover the whole subject of IP, intellectual property, its theory, its history, its significance, and modern practice in 20 minutes.
We can because we're that good.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. And eventually, the more you know a subject, the more you can reduce it down to its essence. So, your guide is coming out on Liberty.me here, I think, very soon, maybe next week. I'm excited about it because, well, some backup here. First of all, you're Stephan Kinsella. Okay, so if people don't know that, they need to know that. It's cool
I am.
information.
Hello, and you're Jeff Tucker,
I
my
am.
good buddy. That's right.
Yeah, that's right. So, but here's the thing. Like, I used to think that liberty was just a kind of a theory for the books and something to read about and reflect about and kind of hope would happen someday. But it was thanks to your IP studies that I first began to throw myself into sort of publishing without copyright. And I saw with my own two eyes how striving towards, sort of living or doing business, within a framework of liberty actually leads to greater success. So I
Hmm.
credit you with sort of the model that led to the founding of Liberty.me.
Well, thank you. And you and I have talked a lot. You've inspired me, and you and I have worked on a lot of these ideas over the last 10 years or something. Um, as a practicing IP attorney, part of my job has always been to give practical legal advice to clients. But over the years, I've been increasingly called upon to give sort of moral, political advice to people based upon these normative and political ideas. And so you and I thought about the idea, what because we get this question all the time: how can you profit in a world without intellectual property, right? And to my mind, that's always been a secondary question, but I understand the reason for it. And the more we look at it, the more ideas we have and the more things we can come up with. So this guide is an attempt to combine a legal, practical, pragmatic, and sort of ethical normative framework and give the combined set of ideas about how you should act in the world in today's world, given the existence of IP law and given the recognition that it's unnecessary and harmful to society and the economy and even to yourself if you follow it too closely.
Well, one big problem with making your business model rest on IP is a problem of enforcement, right? I mean, realistically, IP is almost unenforceable today. At least certainly
So
copyright and probably trademark too, to some extent.
unenforceable by the average person. I think that's basically right. So the first thing I think the average person or the business person or the entrepreneur needs to understand, you have to decide when you make a decision, are you making it normatively, morally, ethically, and are you making it in a business sense informed by what's really going on? Okay, so even if you forget the first few considerations, we need to understand, number one, that the myths about IP are totally false. Copyright law is not designed to help the little guy, and it actually doesn't help the little guy. And the same is true with patents. And so you have to get rid of this idea in the first place. So the question is, how do you use IP, or should you use IP, or how should you regard the moral and practical use of patent and copyright law and other things like trademark and trade secret, which I touch upon briefly. The two big ones are patent and copyright. To my mind, the first thing you need to recognize is that these are distortions of the law. They would not be here if not for legislation and the American Constitution in the case of America. Patent and copyright impede competition. They distort the business world. They distort technology and innovation and research and development. Copyright causes suppression of free speech, and it does hamper ideas that companies have for new musical compositions, new software, etc. This is happening right now. So you have to realize that when you try to take that into account to decide what are you going to do in today's world when you're barraged by claims that you need to protect your ideas, you need to follow patent and copyright law.
Yeah, there's also a problem of cause and effect. I mean, to some extent, I've noticed a tendency on the part of successful, highly successful capitalists to attribute their own profitability to their IP claims or their war chest, where that's actually a disputable idea. I mean, it's not the case that patents alone cause profits to suddenly appear, right?
I think that's actually true. I think in most cases, it's actually not true. In some cases, people do make money off of patents, like patent trolls. In certain entrenched industries like Microsoft and Apple, some of their profits or some of their industry-leading position or some of the way that the industry is structured so that they face less competition than they otherwise would have is a result of copyright and patent. But you wouldn't necessarily say that's a good thing for the economy as a whole, or for innovation, or even for these companies. Apple, for example, and Microsoft have both been on the receiving end of multi-hundred-million-dollar patent verdicts and lawsuits, hundreds of patent lawsuits filed every year. So they're always receiving the fire from patents as well, but they use it at the same time. But I do think that entrepreneurs are not always aware of how or why they got successful. They have a knack. Sometimes they get lucky. And sometimes rich people are not entrepreneurs at all. They just inherited the wealth or they stepped into the shoes of a larger company. But ultimately, the fundamental mistake is correlating causation and correlation. In other words, mistaking correlation for causation. Just because the U.S., for example, became rich starting in the early 1800s, and we also had a constitution and patent and copyright law, doesn't mean that those are the causes of our wealth. It
Right.
could very well be that they are neutral, or that they're actually impediments to innovation and to
Right.
wealth, and that we prospered despite that. So we have to be careful, and we have to realize that someone who's good at making money is not always good at understanding how or exactly why he made money.
Well, let me ask you this. Anytime you've got somebody starting a new business, or certainly an author writing a book, or a composer writing a song, there's almost a kind of universal fear among any sort of creator that his or her idea is going to be, you know, stolen or copied by somebody, and they'll never be able to get their business off the ground. Um, First of all, do you recognize that that fear is true, and do you think there's any legitimacy to it at all?
No, I really don't. I think it's a consequence of the IP mentality that we've been brought up in. People are used to the system of royalties and copyrights and licenses and permissions, and they're used to the rich people in entertainment becoming rich because or based upon a background of copyright and patent law, and they assume that's a necessary part of the property framework. But no, I don't think it's a legitimate concern at all. I think that in
But
the field of
how can it not be legit? I mean, it's anytime you're starting a new business, you want to be the first one there, right? So you do. It seems like that's a normal concern you would have just as a business person, that somebody else is going to, take your idea and do it better than you.
That's correct. So in the field of normal business, you do have to anticipate possible competitors, right? Competition. You have to imagine, if I'm correct that my new business venture is going to be successful and I'm going to attract profits by satisfying consumers with some service or some good, then the price signals and the activity that I'm engaging on in the market, which is a public thing, is going to be broadcast far and wide, and potential competitors are going to notice, and they will compete with me. So every time you imagine a venture that could be profitable, you have to imagine that competition can set in, and there will be competition if and to the extent I'm successful. And the more successful that I am initially, the more greater the competition will be. So you have to envision, well, will my temporary profits be enough, or can I keep going? And will I have to think of new innovations and ways to please the consumer that will keep outpacing the people that compete with me?
Well, and I suppose it's certainly true that it's since all innovation happens in the course of sort of a sequence of time. If you're the real innovator, you're always going to be a step ahead of those who are copying you, right?
Absolutely, and you also have a reputation advantage, and you have an advantage of having the human capital, the people, the knowledge, the know-how, the resources. As Hayek pointed out, some knowledge is what tacit knowledge. I've heard some IP moderate skeptics point out that there would be no sense in having an economics department of a college that would teach economics if the ideas of IP were true, because all the economics professor is doing is taking old economics texts, and the same is true for math and physics or whatever, and they're just regurgitating them to the students. The knowledge is out there, but what does the professor have? He has a particular way of expressing the knowledge and instilling it in the minds of the students, which is not really easily transmittable. So not everything that's valuable is just knowledge that can be copied like a digital song. For a simpler example, think of the popularity of musical concerts. Typically, the musical concert is lower fidelity and lower quality than the CD you could buy or the MP3 file you could buy now or get pirated over the internet. I mean, the MP3 of the original recording of a Beatles song or some popular band song is pristine and perfect and sounds amazing on your speaker system at home. And yet some people will pay money, hundreds of dollars to go to a concert where it's live and the speakers are worse and the sound is worse and the performers are older and it's not as good. There's something ineffable about the live presentation that is not capturable by the pure digital chain of bits on the CD or in the MP3 file. And I think that gets at Hayek's recognition that some knowledge is tacit, and you can't actually express everything you know in a way that you can communicate to others.
Now that you brought this up, it actually is a striking fact, and that I don't remember anybody commenting on. Neither of us have really talked about this. But nowadays at concerts, people are freely taking photographs and broadcasting it live off their iPhones and taking films and everything else. Like everybody in the audience does that. This is just routine. I suppose that there's two things working here. One is that at some point it becomes unenforceable. They would have to actually confiscate all the iPhones, all the smartphones from every single concert attendee, which like nobody would put up with that crap. The other fact is that having people post snippets on their own YouTube accounts actually just helps promote and advertise the concerts in its later presentations. It's actually good for the performer.
Yeah,
that's been a change.
I think it has been a change. And I think there's a third thing. The performers realize that the recorded version from an iPhone or whatever is not as good as either the recorded studio version or as the live performance. It's just not as good. It's not a substitute for either one. So it really doesn't hurt them at all. It's only good. And, if you're performing on stage and you see fans out there recording you, they love you. I mean, they really are. They're interested in you. That's not a problem, not a good thing. The problem may be to figure out how to capitalize off of that, or how to profit off of it, how to monetize that. But that's not a problem to have. That's a good thing.
It's makes you wonder if the movies had taken a different direction here, and not tried to like hate on their customers all the time and give these ridiculous warnings at the beginning of films and all the rest of it. If they might have been better off. I mean, it's kind of cool, if you can imagine like taking 5 minutes of the latest cool movie and putting it on your YouTube account. What are you doing, basically? Are you stealing or are you advertising?
Yeah, you're promoting them. So, but back to you and I have talked ad infinitum, and I've done hundreds of lectures on the normative aspects of IP law, but we were talking in this guide about a practical way. What do people in the real world do? What should you do about IP? And this is a combination of practicality and ethics and normality and norms. And I think that the response should focus on two segments of the society. Number one is people who could take advantage of copyright law, which is creators of artistic works. And number two, businessmen, entrepreneurs who would come up with innovative technological designs, which would be people who would normally obtain patents. And I think the advice would be different for both. And in the guide, I try to lay out different examples and different ways of thinking about this. Number one is think outside the box. Don't assume that the standard advice should apply to you. Number one, because the world is changing very fast, right? And the advice you're getting is the remnant of the last generation. And some of these institutions may be crumbling. The way network TV is produced, the way contracts are done for novel scripts, the way publishing is done. Don't take their advice. Self-publishing is becoming mainstream for novels, for example. Um, so think outside the box in the field of copyrights. And as you mentioned earlier, copyrights very rarely help an independent or a small artist because you really want to get your name out there and you don't have the resources to go out there suing people and collecting royalties, and you don't want to anyway because you want to be friends with your people that love you. You want to have a reciprocal relationship. So for copyright, I see there's actually no conflict whatsoever. This is why in the field of software, the open source movement has grown, and increasingly in the artistic area, free culture and Creative Commons licenses have grown. And people that want to get their information out there and gain customers and gain patrons and gain fans are releasing their stuff for free and with unrestricted licenses under Creative Commons, etc. So they're realizing this. So they're doing an end run around these, quote, benefits the government is giving them, despite the fact that the government is trying to foist this on them. They're trying to extricate themselves from that system. So that's the first sort of segment I would look at. The second would be the patent community, which would be innovators, startup companies, technology companies, who I represent a lot in my legal practice. And I would say sometimes you do have to obtain patents today still, just like you have to obtain the services of a tax attorney if you have, or a CPA, because there's a tax system. But I would say be very careful of spending too much money trying to obtain a bunch of patents that you think are your core asset. Don't think of them as an asset. Think of it as an unnecessary cost of doing business, which is there to defend yourself in a defensive way. And don't get locked into a track of technology because you have patents on area A. If you need to switch to area B or area A prime, do it, even though you don't have patents on that yet. So and the fewer patents you have, the lower is the danger that you will get locked into a dead end of just chasing your past successes and profits.
Can you quickly address, I mean, the most common objections are the things like a movie like I don't know whatever's the biggest movie that's out today. That these the Hunger Games couldn't be made without IP.
Well, yeah, there's a few
or Halo video games and this sort of thing.
Well, the video game model has been shown by Indiegogo and other campaigns that you can fund these games through different campaigns and different techniques. But as for movies, you were mentioning how nowadays there's almost a threatening relationship between the movie producer and the audience, right? If you play a DVD at your house, or even if you go to the theater now, there's a big FBI warning basically threatening you with prison time if you use the information they're giving to you in exchange for money, by the way, if you use it in the wrong way, which is a very hostile thing to do. You would never invite someone to your house and say, hey, my child is going to play a piano recital for you, but if any of you remember it too well, I'm going to kill you. It's kind of a hostile thing to do. Right. So this relationship is a new one. I mean, I don't remember it happening more than 20 years ago, let's say. So what was the movie industry like before 20, 30 years ago? Let's say 40 years ago. There were blockbusters then. There were big produced movies in Hollywood in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And at that time, the only stream of revenue was the ticket receipts from playing movies in big movie theaters. There weren't DVDs, there weren't VHS players, there weren't airplane rentals, there weren't hotel rentals, there wasn't iTunes streaming. There weren't a lot of merchandising things from dolls and things like that. Basically, a movie was funded from the expectation of revenues from ticket sales. And that apparently was enough to fund some of the greatest movies ever made. Sound of Music, for example, right? So the first thing we have to recognize is that in the modern age, there's extra sources of revenue which are on top of the original expectation of revenue that the movie industry was built upon. That's a
Mm-hmm.
good thing, but they're just extra. They're lagniappe, as we would say in Louisiana. So I would say number one, even if pirating, as you want to call it, or copying would cut into the profits of the secondary and tertiary sources of revenue, like airplane rentals and hotel rentals and iTunes and DVD and Netflix, you could still show a movie at the movie theater and charge for the tickets, and that might make tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's enough to fund many movies. And then there still would be secondary and tertiary sources. They would be eat into by the presence of piracy or the threat of copying, and you have to take that into account in the real world, which they do even now. Because even though there's copyright law, you and I both know that there's tons of piracy and torrenting and copying, and even though there's copyright law, the movie studios have to take that into account, and they do. So they still make a profit even on those secondary and third level sources of income, even though there's piracy. So I think movies would be funded just like they are now, just like they were in the 50s and 60s and 70s, by the prospect of revenues from ticket sales and um, from other transactional deals. There'd be licensing, cross promotions. I
How do
don't
you
know if you
address
and I.
the? Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Well,
I
I
was
was
going to
going
say,
to. Go ahead. No, go ahead. You please go ahead.
I don't know if you and I talked about a related idea, which is how novelists would make money, like Harry Potter. The Harry Potter novels, J.K. Rowling, she's a billionaire. She's like the first or second richest woman in the UK right now. And people say, well, without copyrights, you couldn't make money. But anyone with a bit of entrepreneurial imagination could think of a lot of ways she could make money in a copyright-free world. Um, she could publish the first one or two novels, and if they were popular, and they would be more popular more quickly, possibly because of piracy, she could have millions of fans across the world. And once she knew this, by sales of Kindle books and whatever, then she could write the next two or three novels and have an Indiegogo campaign and say, I'm going to release books 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 when I get this many subscriptions. Or she could say, hey, there are 3 or 4 movies in the works right now of Harry Potter #1, because movie producers would feel free to copy or use any novel as a basis for a movie. She could say, I'm going to volunteer to endorse one of them, be a consultant. It will be the authorized version, and it will draw more fans that way, because my fans will prefer to see the Harry Potter movie that J.K. Rowling has endorsed, and they would give her a cut of the revenues for that benefit. So there's a lot of ways that she could have still been a multimillionaire. Totally in a world of without copyright, even where her books were free to be copied, pirated, and turned into movies, even without her consent.
What about the example that anybody's going to give immediately, and probably many viewers are wondering about this, pharmaceuticals? Do you have a quick response to that? I'm happy to say that this is an exceptional case just because of the presence of the FDA, which vastly increases the capital capital requirements for innovating in that sector. Which is not to say that IP is in this case justified. It just seems like the patent system works as a sort of compensation for other forms of egregious regulation. Which review?
I think if you get someone to admit that the patent system seems to be problematic in every case that we mentioned, like patent trolling, software patents, electrical patents, the only medical devices, life-saving procedures, that kind of stuff. The only case where we think it really makes sense is pharmaceuticals. If you get them to that point, then you can say, well, let's look closely at this whole area. Let's see. Number one, we have a pharmaceutical industry which is heavily distorted by the FDA. As you mentioned, the FDA, I think you need to really understand how the patent law works and how the FDA system works. and how government regulations affect these companies to have an informed opinion on it. And once you see all these things and you see the empirical research that has been done about the effect of patents on this area, you'll see that it's been exaggerated by the industry and by proponents of patents in other areas.
Yeah.
Just to summarize really quickly, the FDA, the patent system originally was designed to induce companies to reveal their secrets that they would otherwise keep private or secret. That's the entire purpose of the patent system. It's not really to increase innovation, it's to increase disclosure of innovation earlier than it otherwise would be disclosed. And in return for that, and their disclosure is in the form of the patent application, which is made public, in return for revealing your secrets, you get a monopoly for 17 or so years on this idea. That was the original idea of the patent system. The FDA system requires companies to get government approval of a drug before they can sell it. And to get approval of the drug, they have to go through this scrutinizing process where they have to reveal the ingredients of the drug. So the FDA system forces you to reveal your information anyway. If you have to reveal your information anyway, you might as well get a patent on it to get the other side of the bargain, because by the time the 7, 5, 12-year patent FDA process is done, all your competitors already know what you're going to do. They're geared up to compete with you. You don't have a first mover advantage as much anymore because you had to lower your panties and reveal your secrets. And then the excuse is, well, the patent was only 17 years and I've lost 7 years because of the delay in the process. So the government says, well, we're going to extend your patent by another 7 years because of an extension. We're going to extend your patent because of delay in our other bureaucratic process. And I would say just look at I think it's chapter 7 or maybe 9 in McKelly Boldrin and David Levine's great book, Against Intellectual Monopoly, and they go through the empirical details of the pharmaceutical industry, and they show that the patent system really is only a very small part of the financial considerations that actual pharmaceutical companies have to engage in. So it's only a fraction in the first place. It really doesn't help them that much. And it's engaged in primarily to combat the costs the government imposes upon them through the FDA process itself and through taxes and regulations like the minimum wage and pro-union laws and tariffs and other regulations. So anyone sensible would not say that the agency, which is the federal government in the U.S., that imposes this distortion and this cost on the pharmaceutical industry should remedy it by granting another bureaucratic nightmare, which is the patent system, to try to fix it. The solution would be to reduce all these layers of control and to allow the free market to operate once again. And one more thing, there's if you look at McKelly and Boldrin's book, they give historical case studies of, I think, Italy and Switzerland, who had no patent system whatsoever in pharmaceuticals for a good 50 or 75 or 100 years in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they were like among the leaders of the pharmaceutical industry. So it's just empirically false that you need a patent system to be a leader in pharmaceutical development.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love this topic because it's practical. It shows how freedom works and how freedom can be a choice for us. We can actively configure our lives in a way to embrace institutions of freedom rather than institutions of coercion and compulsion, and be more successful as a result. I'm inspired by the case of IP in the same sense I'm inspired by things like cryptocurrency, because they show us how we can make a freer world just by making better choices.
Yeah, me too. And in the guide, you'll find lots of concrete examples, far more than we've had time to get into here. As an example, people will say, I can't afford a patent lawyer, or I can't afford to get a lot of patents, but I'm afraid someone else will patent my invention. What should I do? And my advice sometimes is publish it. Just do an end run around them. You don't need anyone's permission to publish it. Put it on your blog. Make your ideas public. Tell your customers, tell the world what you're going to do. And when you make it public, you establish under the patent law what's called a prior art bar. And you get this, once you make the idea public, then no one else who comes up with the idea after can file a patent on it and get a patent on it. So you do have to reveal your idea, but you do for 5 cents or for nothing. You do prevent someone from getting a patent on it. So you protect yourself from competition, and you tell the world, I'm bold, I'm confident, I don't mind if anyone competes with me.
Yeah.
Go ahead, compete with me. Sort of like Tesla did recently, right? When they announced that
Yeah.
they're not going to enforce their patents against competitors anymore.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Well, Stephan, I've taken up enough of your time. It's really wonderful to have you here, and I look forward to seeing your guide come out sometime next week. And I'm pretty sure you're going to be teaching some classes on this. So I look forward to seeing you at Liberty.me. And now that I'm on Freedom Fest this week, I'll give you some call during the week and let you know how things are going.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Okay. Bye-bye, dear friend. Bye-bye.
Bye.